Well, but that's another thing that people I think fail to recognize is that like if I were to say, oh, Destiny's just a crypto libertarian fascist. Oh, what's your evidence for that? Well, he calls himself a capitalist. And then you were to say, well, what do you mean? Like Destiny is not a libertarian fascist. He believes in like social democracy and he believes in the welfare state. And then I were to say,
Hentai Gunicide in Hutch's chat just said, calls himself Econoboi, has economic philosophy of a 4-year-old. Thank you, Hentai Gunicide, okay?
oh, yeah. But look at all these capitalist libertarians who are retarded and want to like into the welfare state and privatize everything. Case in point. Be like, well, that's kind of stupid because obviously people who call themselves capitalists, there's an extremely wide range of ideologies and like interpretations of capitalist and capitalism over time that encompasses literally like anarcho-capitalists like Fabian Liberty all the way to like Nordic social democrats that believe in, public ownership in the welfare state and stuff like that. But I don't know. It's people are dug in, I guess.
Well, let's interrogate your specific brand of socialism a bit.
All right, Hutch, let's do it. Interrogate.
So I read your Substack article and then I watched a debate that you had with not necessarily a debate, but like a clarifying conversation you had with, I can't remember the guy's name, but you were sort of diving into your kind of more market-based socialism. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you simplified your definition of socialism to simply mean the workers own the means of production, right?
No. So collective ownership of the means of production is really how I would define it, and that's a really pluralist definition, right? So you can really mean a lot of different things when you say collective ownership. Because obviously there's different ways to collectivize things, but worker ownership, consumer ownership, public ownership, these are all kind of like ways to socialize things. And so it's just really a question of like, which ways do you think we should socialize things on an institutional level?
And you suggested the idea that the government itself would be given or purchase ownership.
I mean, Vosh Remix is correct, right? If you look at the title of his stream, what is it? What is the title of his stream today? Addressing the allegations. Ooh, I remember that video from Vosh.
Part ownership in these companies, right? So, are you saying that the government should have the authority to, purchase like a majority share to every single company, or what? Are we talking about hostile takeovers here? Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, for those interested in the in-depth explanation, part 3 of the Why I Became a Socialist series explains basically in depth my socialist model. And
why I become a socialist? Number 1, I'm a dumbass.
The way that I would see things done is through voluntary transactions. So number 1, there's a lot of finance capital out there. So by finance capital, I mean liquid capital like stocks and bonds and ETFs, right? So anybody can buy those at any point at the strike price. So if Walmart is selling whatever their shares for $80 a piece, there's nothing to stop like the public institutions from purchasing that stock. Now, when it comes to private capital, you would still have a voluntary transaction. It would just be, the transaction cost would just be slightly higher because you have to have this kind of negotiated process for buying out equity. But the way that I would manage that process is through independent holding corporations. So there's an entire book called The Public Wealth of Nations and a sequel called The Public Wealth of Cities, where Dag Detter, who's an investment banker, he kind of talks about how the independent holding corporation is probably the best way to manage public wealth. And the best example of that is probably Temasek in Singapore. And if you look at Temasek in Singapore, they control like hundreds of billions of dollars of Singaporean wealth, and they allocate it entrepreneurially. So they try to look out.
I got it. Leftist theory is just astrology for political theory, for political theorists, okay? It is astrology for men, all right? That's what it is, okay? Political theory is Yeah, it literally is astrology for men. It's
and go
cringe.
out and like buy positive ROI investments and manage
doesn't
those
matter.
investments, just like any kind of private equity company or asset manager would. And my ideal society would have a lot of these different independent holding corporations managing assets on behalf of the public and going out and buying capital and just engaging in like the kind of activity that asset
We're
managers
terminally
already
online
do.
men.
And by doing that, you essentially socialize the wealth of society and trickle up the gains of that wealth to everyone.
How would you? How much capital would be required to actually purchase these holdings?
Oh, it'd be quite a lot. I mean, you'd have to do it over time with various sort of like sources of funds. There's a section in part 3 of the Why I Became a Socialist thing where I talk about a kind of practical path forward. But in terms of the wealth of society, I think we have about $160 trillion of wealth in the United States, and something like 70% of that is owned by the top 10%. And so under my ideal framework, you would kind of start chipping away at that by these voluntary transactions and kind of marginalizing private wealth by increasing public wealth. And, look at Norway, for instance. They've socialized basically 2/3 of the wealth of Norway. So of all the wealth of Norway, 2/3 of it is already socially owned through basically the mechanism that I'm describing. They use a sovereign wealth fund and not an independent holding corporation, but you can think of like a sovereign wealth fund and an independent holding corporation aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. You can have both or either. And so if Norway can socialize 2/3 of the whole entire wealth of the country within one generation, basically since, not a little bit more than one generation, basically since the last 30 years, I think it's certainly possible for the United States to engage in a similar type of project.
Well, in your system, so like, would you have any kind of mechanism to stop companies or stakeholders from taking action to like prevent you from having like a majority share in the company? Like, would you prevent like stock buybacks, for example, if they wanted to dilute this wealth fund's sort of power that they have? What would stop them from just trying to do stock buybacks, for example? Or like,
Well, equity investors don't really want to do stock buybacks, or not stock buybacks, because there's a difference between stock buybacks and issuing new equity.
What the fuck is a stock buyback? Like what? The company buys back the stocks for whatever reason? Or fuck. This economics shit is stupid, okay? Economics is made up anyway. That's a joke, okay? Don't kill me.
Equity. So a stock buyback, you buy the
Yes.
already existing shares.
But you bought it. Doesn't it belong to you? They buy back stock instead of paying dividends? Okay. Listen, economics is just astrology for men, okay?
So, for instance, let's say that the United States owned, let's say 2/3 of Amazon, for instance, just as an example. I'm not saying this is necessarily what would happen, but let's say that you have 2/3 of Amazon owned by these various independent holding corporations. Well, if the corporation wanted to buy back stock, quote unquote, they would have to convince the holding corporations to sell them back that stock, or they would have to buy back already privately owned stock. Now, to the question of like, what if they just issue like, oh, like the holding corporation purchased 2/3 of our company, we're just going to issue like,
This is like the driest fucking college fucking like macro economics lecture I've ever heard, dude. It is literally like a fucking, oh god, it's like a college lecture. Oh god, I hope that Hutch pushes back on this so then we can have some content.
100% more shares or whatever.
that's right.
Well, you'd end up with a lot of
Listen, I
problems.
already
Number
caught
one,
violence
private
this
investors
morning.
don't want you to do that because you're diluting their ownership stake
You're asking me to double dose. I'm not double dosing on finance.
as well.
Yeah.
And number two, obviously the investors who are in charge of the holding corporations.
Econoboi is too 5-head for maybe. Like, this is why when it comes to other topics, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But like, this like economic theory shit is so stupid. Like for example, if a communist in my server were to talk about like communist theory, like, what am I supposed to say? I'm sorry that I don't know like every single possible detail of Marx's like fucking ideology.
also aren't going to want you to just like issue a bunch of new shares, because then you'd be diluting their ownership. So you see this pretty much in all other corporations that are already owned in part or in whole by, or I should say in part or like in majority by public institutions, that they don't just issue a bunch of equity because pretty much nobody would want them to do that under a normal circumstance.
Do you think about potential problems in terms of, like, let's say the government is successful and they've taken majority like ownership of, you know, like 10 like major US companies. Do you worry about like the kind of control that the government would have on the company itself? Like what's your argument against the idea that maybe the government wouldn't be best positioned to, you know, make decisions for the company that was in the best interest of the company? Like what would stop the government if you're coming in and exerting influence in a way that would potentially like destroy these companies?
No, absolutely. That's something I'm extremely concerned about. It's one of the reasons why I read the book, The Public Wealth of Nations. And it's one of the reasons why Matt Brunig wasn't able to convince me of socialism when we first spoke, because his answer to that question was basically like, well, you know, when the government is the universal owner, they're incentivized to properly allocate investment. Essentially what he was saying was like, hey, if the government's managing a portfolio, they're not going to want, you know, basically like poorly performing companies in their portfolio. But if, like you said, I think in history, there's a lot of examples of the public kind of inefficiently managing public wealth. And that's where the Public Wealth of Nations book comes in. And that's where the Independent Holding Corporation comes in, that when you have this kind of like system of accountability where it's independent from the government, but in and of itself, it is a system of accountability that seems to work pretty well at ensuring proper management of public wealth. Dag Detter, one of the guys who wrote this book, essentially his experience was that he was the head of state industry for Sweden under the Social Democrats in the late 90s and early 2000s, when they wanted to reconstitute their public portfolio. Because what they found was that, okay, like the socialists were in power for a long time. We have a lot of public ownership in Sweden, but it seems like a lot of that ownership is opaque and it's also like poorly run. And so how can we make it transparent and how can we make it properly run? And one of the things that they did was they basically said, to address the problem that you're talking about, they basically said, hey, you know, these companies, look, you guys are just going to maximize profits, and the politicians, we're not going to do anything, basically. We're going to say the politicians have no say.
Wait, what? Wait, so then you seize the industry. The goal and task is to maximize profits, but the politicians are going to do? Then what's the point? I thought the entire point was like state control and state-directed state-directed production from these companies, right? Like the reason why you want to seize a medication producing company is to make sure everyone gets life-saving medication or something without it being too expensive. If you're just trying to maximize profit, what's the point in seizing it in the first place?
In what's going on with this portfolio, but that's actually not a good solution, because you still need accountability for these companies through some mechanism. Just telling companies to run themselves isn't a good idea. Like shareholders need to be able to hold accountable these companies. And so what they did, and what a lot of other countries do, is they have independent professional managers of these assets, which themselves are, in some like transitive sense, accountable to the government because they're like public appointees. But if you engage in a rule-based process to appoint professionals to these boards that then manage these assets and hold these individual portfolio companies accountable, that basically is the best of both worlds, because you have independent professional management, but also not political management. And I use the Federal Reserve as probably the best United States example. If we think about the Federal Reserve, like the Federal Reserve is an entity that enforces a significant
This guy is like just straight up anti-content. I'm sorry. I'm following loosely. I'm following a little bit. But this is rough. I'm gonna skip forward and see if they argue. This is rough. Jesus Christ. This is like, is this what waterboarding feels like?
We get closer to this. You just told me we're going to get closer to this equilibrium.
Gosh.
They're arguing?
not gonna. They're collectively they are gonna crush
I can't lie to you.
this thing before it starts. Like there's just no question that they're gonna crush it.
Hutch, there's Hutch, no, that's not true. Again, we have examples of national level scales of this in other countries. If you want to say those other countries are different, then fine. But with America, like for instance, hang on a second. We're the richest country in the history of the world. The capital owners in the United States have massively more wealth than they do in countries like individual countries like Sweden or individual states like Alaska. And this collective, that's because they do these kind of policies that I'm talking about.
This collective of billionaires are going to see this for what it is immediately, just like socialism, right? We're just working towards socialism, but without trying to force it. And they're gonna squash this thing just immediately. They're just
or they're gonna move. What's the point of staying in a fucking state where they're trying to nationalize everything, right? They're just gonna move.
It's gonna squash it.
No, I don't. I totally don't agree. I mean, we're just going in circles at this point.
We are definitely.
Yeah, the last thing I like, just like to sum up, like, look, I think that if the U.S. passed a bill that said, hey, we think that the government has a poor system of accounting for all of our public assets. We're gonna spend a year doing a forensic audit and put all these public assets in a portfolio, and then we're gonna put this portfolio in the hands of an independent holding corporation to go out and do whatever they want, allocate this capital efficiently. That is a bill that I could see straight up.
A sovereign wealth fund in an already state-run extraction industry isn't the same as him applying it to a 90 to 96% of every company in the country. Yeah, sure.
Getting bipartisan.
You're saying that he's making a specific example that doesn't apply to other industries because every single industry is going to have different attributes, and it's going to be harder to control some industries versus some other industries, right? That's what you're saying. Like, for example, if controlling a pharmaceutical company, the state seizing control of a pharmaceutical company is different from the state seizing control of a fucking mining coal company.
Consensus on, right? And with regard to like the idea that like, oh, the billionaires will be against it, again, I think that that's fundamentally, I think that that's a misunderstanding of general.
Why the fuck would they spend money to fight it when they can just simply spend money to move away? It's not easy to move away, sure, but it's like, what's the point? What's the point? If this is like the will of the people or whatever, then move away. Goodbye.
Generally speaking, the incentives and motives of most shareholders. That shareholders just want to sell, if they want to sell their stock, they just want to sell it at the strike price, and they'll sell it to anyone, whether it's public or private institutions. I would agree that, like, number one, I think that we've already made progress in you saying, I think that this could work, period. If we're just making political feasibility arguments, I think there's a hell of a lot more examples of these kind of institutions sprouting up. And if it can work in a culture as diverse as Malaysia, all the way to Canada, all the way to Singapore, all the way to Norway, I think that it can work within an American cultural context, right?
Well, let me put it this way.
Well, they're not. I'm pretty sure these are not like socialist governments, though, right? Well, why haven't they turned? Unless you're saying they're in a process of turning socialist, but I feel like there's no reality in which they're not going to participate in a world market, where it's like, I mean, at this point, aren't you just kind of advocating for a CEO king? Hello, Curtis Yarvin.
You say that this would be a massive wealth redistribution program, like moving towards collective ownership of these corporations, a means of production. So where is this wealth being transferred from, and who is the wealth going towards?
Well, the wealth would be transferred from anyone who wants to voluntarily sell it to these different holding corporation entities, and where it would go to.
That's not a wealth transfer, though.
That is a wealth transfer.
If you purchase, no, wealth transfer would be like taking money from over here and putting it over there. If you're selling these shares.
Then if you swap a productive asset for cash.
Wealth transfer is when I take the food out of your mom's fridge, okay, after I'm done fucking her in the ass.
Cash, right? Cash is not something that by itself can accumulate. It's just cash at that point, right? Now, if the public
There's
now
some
owns
mask on.
a productive asset and a shareholder
I mean, saying that he wants to take 90 to 91% of the industries is pretty mask off. Does that make sense? He's leaving so much out of the history. Oh shit. Or maybe what if he's just like selectively not knowing? Which part of the history is he leaving out, do you think? Here's the thing, okay? And here's the reality. If you he wants to control 90 to 91% of the industry in a country, right? Fine. You have to believe in violent revolution then. You have to. You have to bite down that bullet. There's no way you're gonna take that much without any kind of like actual physical violence. You have to. You have to send in the cops. You have to send in the state police. All right, you have to. You have to. Okay? You really think they're all gonna comply with this fucking new law to hand over your fucking industry or some shit? Hand over your fucking factories? What? It's fucking kulaks? Hell no, okay? The managerial class will not abide.
now has
I think once the cops are coming, they're gonna grab their fucking gun.
a bunch of cash, then that sort of, again, over time, that kind of like marginalizes the wealthy, because it ends up being the case that the wealth of the public accumulates and the cash that these shareholders now own doesn't accumulate as much. And that's why we see in like Norway, you
Oh yeah! Hold on one second. I just realized a really good counter to this. Startup companies will be almost non-existent. There's no a lot of innovation comes from startup companies, okay, and from coming up with new ideas in startup companies. Startup companies will literally be non-existent in these kinds of socialist fucking like social adjacent. You want to make sure that your own fucking personal business and ideas and like intellectual property is safe. You want to make sure it's safe, okay? You can't guarantee the safety if you know that at some point the government is just gonna take it away. What the fuck? Whether by force or by legal means, right? Because it's written into law. Like, why do you think all the innovation happens here in the United States and not in fucking Norway, right? Why don't you think that stuff happens in Norway? It doesn't matter if there's a collective IQ is higher. It doesn't matter if like a lot of their citizens are living better. When they need to build a business, they move to America to build a business. They don't go to Norway to build a business. That's retarded. Right?
see this like difference in wealth inequality over time from their public ownership.
Would Bezos and Musk and Zuckerberg make less money in the long run with this system?
Sure.
It just depends on what they do with their cash.
No, the answer is yes. What?
I guess I have so many questions for.
Like if you wanted to sell a bunch of shares, if you're
Okay. Number one. Startup companies, okay? Startup companies will be fucked, okay? That's number one, all right? Number two, the entertainment industry, if you say that you want like 90 to 91%, you're essentially taking over Hollywood, right? You're taking over Hollywood, okay? You turn everything into state propaganda instead of having like artwork and shit reminiscent of like maybe some kind of creative statement, right? Because everything has to go by like some kind of fucking political agreement or consensus or something, right? It's so fucking retarded. So number one, the entertainment industry will be retarded. It'll be like Chinese entertainment, right? Everything has to go through the fucking CCP for approving, right? This is why everyone looks up to Hollywood, because they actually have like the fucking creative freedoms that they do, right? Like, do you want CCP fucking like cop shows, or do you want like fucking Hollywood cop shows? What the fuck? Give me some of that Fast and Furious and fucking Rush Hour. All right, shit, you know. Like the thing is that people want innovation. People want to have the freedom to start a business. And here's the thing, for a normie, making a startup business is like a dream come true. They all want to make startup businesses, okay? Like the average normie, like if you ever question, hey, what is it that you want to do? Well, one day I want to make a startup business. That's like the most average fucking response ever. You're really gonna deprive them of that? What? It's like wanting a middle class home at this point. Like, oh, I want to start a business. It's just selling shit. Dude, even my mom says shit like that.
you're like Bezos and you said, you know what, fuck it. This holding corporation wants to buy 2/3 of. Well, it doesn't even work that way. Because again, like Amazon, like Bezos only owns like 15% of Amazon.
And what is the incentive? And what is the incentive to create new companies? Seriously, serious question. What is the incentive to create new companies, knowing that it's going to be possessed by the state, right?
On, right? So like our system of shareholder ownership is already wildly diverse. Like Bezos was literally willing
exactly
to share a gigantic stake of Amazon to all of these different distributed investors and like lose majority control over Amazon.
Okay, think about this, okay? Maybe for companies that already exist, maybe it's hard for them to move away. I get it, okay? You have all your physical, like, factories there in the country, so it's really hard to fucking, like, move away, right? You, like, rebuying everything, selling all the factories to the state, and then rebuying everything is, like, a fucking pain in the ass, right? However, let's just say you're a person looking to make a new fucking startup company. Would you rather start up a company in a fucking socialist country, or would you rather start it in some place like the fucking United States of America? No shit, Sherlock. Of course you want to start it in fucking Silicon Valley. Why the fuck wouldn't you? You have all the fucking protections afforded to a fucking innovator, right? But you don't have any, like, barely any protections if it's made by a fucking retarded Vanguard Party government.